I should have kept my mouth shut. That is the single clearest thought I have ever had, and it arrived approximately 3 seconds too late. I was standing in the grand reception hall of the Velari throne world, dressed in a diplomatic uniform that fit me like a punishment, surrounded by alien aristocrats who moved like living sculptures through columns of pale golden light. Danny Price, my only friend on this delegation, had nudged me with his elbow and whispered a question that would ruin my life in the best possible way. "So what do you think of the locals?" I glanced at the enormous holographic portrait dominating the far wall. It showed the Queen of the Velari Queendom in full ceremonial regalia, 7 feet of silver blue skin, luminous violet eyes, cheekbones that could cut glass, and a jawline that belonged on the cover of every magazine humanity had ever printed. Her name was Seveni Valkorath. She ruled 43 star systems, commanded a fleet of 9,000 warships, and had been on the throne longer than I had been alive. I leaned toward Danny and whispered 5 words that I genuinely believed no one else would hear. "The Queen is absolutely gorgeous." Danny did not laugh. Danny did not nod. Danny's face went white, then gray, then a shade I did not know human skin could produce. His eyes locked onto something directly behind me, and his lips moved without sound. I think he was trying to say, "Turn around," but his body had forgotten how to make words. I turned around. She was standing 3 feet away. Not the portrait, the actual queen. Seveni Valkorath in the living, breathing, 7-foot-tall flesh, flanked by 4 royal guards in black armor, who looked like they had been specifically designed to end problems like me. Her violet eyes were fixed on my face with an expression I could not read, and the entire hall had gone so silent I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the crystal ceiling. Ambassador Harrison Wells materialized at my side, with the speed of a man watching his career evaporate. He started talking immediately, a stream of diplomatic language so dense it could have been used as armor plating. He apologized for the cultural insensitivity. He apologized for the breach of protocol. He apologized for me specifically, as a human being, in a way that made it clear he wished I had never been born. The Velari Protocol Minister, a tall female with emerald-tinted skin and an expression like chewing glass, stepped forward and addressed the ambassador in clipped tones. She explained that in Velari civilization, males did not comment on the appearance of females in positions of authority. It was not simply rude. It was a violation so fundamental that it did not have a name, because no male had ever been foolish enough to commit it. In 40,000 years of recorded history, across every species the queendom had contacted, no male had ever looked at the reigning queen and said what I had just said. I stood there and felt the floor trying to swallow me. Then Queen Seveni raised one hand, and every voice in the hall stopped as if someone had pulled a plug. She looked at the protocol minister, she looked at the ambassador, she looked at the guards. And then she looked at me, and something shifted behind her eyes that I did not understand. "Repeat it," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected. It had a resonance to it, a depth that you felt in your chest rather than heard with your ears. The translator implant behind my ear delivered the words in English, but something in her tone did not need translation. The protocol minister started to object. The queen silenced her with a glance. "You," she said, and she was looking directly at me. "The human male. Repeat what you said, to my face." I thought about lying. I thought about softening it into something diplomatic, something that could be explained away as a translation error. I thought about my career, which had been modest to begin with, and was now a smoking crater. I thought about the fact that this woman commanded enough firepower to turn Earth into a memory. Then I thought about the fact that she had asked me to be honest, and I had never been good at being anything else. I said, "You are gorgeous, Your Majesty." I did not mumble it. I did not whisper it. I said it clearly, standing straight, looking directly into those violet eyes from about 2.5 feet below them. The hall erupted into noise. The protocol minister looked like she was having a medical event. Danny had backed away so far he was practically in the corridor. The queen studied me for a long time, 5 seconds, 10, an eternity compressed into a stare that I felt in my bones. Then she did something that made the entire court freeze in genuine confusion. She smiled. It was small, it was brief. It vanished almost before it appeared, but I saw it, and so did everyone else in that hall, and the silence that followed was different from the silence before. The first silence had been shock. This silence was fear. The Velari court was afraid of their queen's smile, and that told me something important about this place that I would not fully understand until much later. "Ambassador Wells," she said, without looking away from me, "your delegation will extend its stay. This one will be reassigned as my cultural observer. See that he is given quarters in the royal wing." The ambassador opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then simply nodded. He had survived long enough in diplomacy to recognize a moment when arguing would be suicide. The queen turned and walked away, her guards falling in around her like a closing fist. The court parted before her and sealed shut behind her, and I was left standing in the middle of the reception hall with every alien eye in the room locked onto me like targeting systems. Danny appeared at my side. His color had returned to something approaching human. "What just happened?" he asked. "I have no idea. Did she just smile at you?" "I think so." "Ethan, I need you to understand something. I have been studying Velari diplomatic records for 6 months. There is no documented instance of Queen Sivani Val Karath smiling in public, ever, in 40 years of rule." I looked at him. He looked at me. Neither of us had anything useful to say. An hour later, I was being escorted through corridors I was fairly certain no human had ever walked. The royal wing of the Velari Palace was not like the reception areas. There were no crowds, no ceremony, no noise. The walls were a deep, living blue, and the light came from bioluminescent panels that pulsed gently, like breathing. My escort was a young female guard, who had not spoken a single word to me, and whose hand had not left the weapon at her hip since we departed the main hall. She stopped at a door, pressed her palm to a panel, and stepped aside. The room beyond was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a city that stretched to the horizon under a sky with 3 moons. The furniture was clearly designed for someone much larger than me, but someone had placed a set of human-proportioned items near the window, a desk, a chair, a sleeping platform, as though my arrival had been anticipated. That detail bothered me. I had been reassigned on what appeared to be a spontaneous decision, but someone had already prepared this room. My communicator chimed. It was Ambassador Wells. "Cole, listen to me carefully," he said, and the usual diplomatic polish was gone from his voice. What remained was something raw and worried. "I have been in foreign service for 22 years. I have negotiated with species that eat their negotiating partners. I have never been in a situation where I have absolutely no idea what is happening, and I am in one now. That makes 2 of us, sir. You have been placed in the royal wing. Do you understand what that means? No male of any species has ever been housed in the royal wing. Not a diplomat, not a head of state, not even the consorts of minor queens. You are in rooms that are reserved for the queen's inner circle, and the queen's inner circle is a group of 7 females who have served her for decades." "Why would she do this?" He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. "I don't know, Ethan, and that is what scares me. You have either just saved our first interstellar alliance, or you have destroyed it entirely, and I cannot tell which. Watch every word you say. Watch every step you take. And for the love of everything, do not tell the queen she is gorgeous again." I sat down on the edge of the sleeping platform and stared out at the 3 moons rising over the alien city. Somewhere in this palace, the most powerful woman in 43 star systems had smiled at me, and nobody, including me, knew why. I had been on this planet for 6 hours. I was a junior cultural attaché, the lowest-ranking member of a delegation that was itself considered barely worth noticing. My entire job was supposed to be taking notes in the background while important people talked about trade agreements. Now I was sleeping in the Queen's wing, and the silence around me had the weight of something waiting to happen. I did not sleep that night, not even close. The morning started with a knock that sounded like a polite threat. I opened the door to find a Velari female in deep blue robes waiting with her hands folded in front of her. She introduced herself as Counselor Malith, personal advisor to Queen Sivani, and she looked at me the way a scientist looks at a specimen that has just done something unexpected and possibly dangerous. "You will accompany me," she said. It was not a request. She led me through corridors that twisted deeper into the palace. Guards nodded to her at every checkpoint and stared at me with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open hostility. I was an anomaly in a system that did not tolerate anomalies, and every Velari I passed seemed to feel it like a splinter under their skin. We entered a gallery overlooking a vast courtroom, and Malith gestured for me to sit. Below us, the morning session of the Queen's Court was already underway. Dozens of Velari officials moved through a ritual I could not follow, presenting documents, offering formal addresses, receiving instructions. It was beautiful and precise, and it was completely hollow. Every word was scripted, every gesture was choreographed. Every response was predetermined by centuries of protocol, and the Queen sat at the center of it like a jewel, locked in a setting that had been designed to hold her still. I watched for 2 hours. In that time, not a single person spoke directly to Seveni. They spoke to her title. They addressed the crown, or the sovereign light, or the voice of the queendom. They bowed toward the throne rather than looking at the person sitting in it, and the Queen responded in kind, her voice formal and flat, every sentence constructed from what I recognized as standardized ceremonial phrases. She was the most powerful being on this planet, and she was a ghost in her own court. Malith watched me watching. When the session ended and the courtiers filed out in perfect order, she turned to me with that same clinical expression. "You see it," she said. It was not a question. Nobody talks to her. Nobody has talked to her in 41 years, human, not truly. There are conversations, of course. Briefings, policy sessions, strategic consultations. But those are exchanges of information between a sovereign and her instruments. They are not conversations. No one asks her what she thinks. No one asks her how she feels. No one says anything to her that has not been reviewed, approved, and stripped of any content that might be considered personal. That sounds like a prison. Malith's expression tightened. Be very careful with words like that. You brought me here to see this. You want me to understand something, so help me understand. She was quiet for a moment. Below us, the courtroom was emptying. The Queen's throne sat vacant, gleaming under lights that served no audience. When you spoke to her last night, Malith said slowly, it was the first unscripted sentence directed at her person in longer than you have been alive. Not her title, not her office, her. You looked at the Queen and spoke to the woman, and you did it without asking permission, without consulting protocol, without any awareness of the weight of what you were doing. I was just being honest. That is precisely the point. You were honest. In this court, in this civilization, honesty directed at the sovereign is an impossibility. It is not forbidden because it might happen. It is forbidden because it cannot happen. The protocols exist to ensure that nothing uncontrolled, nothing genuine, nothing real ever reaches her. And then you, a male, from a species we had not even formally classified yet, walked into her reception hall and told her she was gorgeous. She said the word like it was a foreign object she was holding at arm's length. She has been queen for 41 years, Malith continued. She has received 10,000 formal compliments, each one identical, each one meaningless. She has been called radiant, exalted, transcendent, magnificent. These are titles, not observations. They describe the throne, not the woman. What you said was different. You looked at her, and you responded to what you saw. That is something no one in this galaxy has offered her, and I do not think you understand what it did to her. I sat with that for a long time. The gallery was silent. The 3 moons were visible through the high windows, pale against the daylight sky. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because there are people in this court who want to use you, Ethan Cole, and you need to understand the ground you are standing on before they push you off it. Before I could respond, movement below caught my eye. A tall Velari female in military dress strode into the empty courtroom, trailed by a unit of soldiers in dark gray armor. She moved with the kind of authority that does not ask for attention because it already owns it. Her skin was a darker shade than the Queen's, almost charcoal blue, and her eyes were a hard, cold amber. High Commandant Drelith, Malith said, and her voice dropped. commander of the Queendom's military forces, head of the defense tribunal, and the most dangerous person you will encounter on this world. More dangerous than the Queen? Malith looked at me with an expression that was almost sad. The Queen is powerful. Dralith is ambitious. In my experience, ambition with a military behind it is always more immediately dangerous than power bound by duty. I watched Dralith move through the courtroom below, issuing orders to aides who scrambled to keep up. She paused near the throne and looked at it with an expression I recognized immediately. I had seen it on the faces of people who were measuring something they intended to take. I stayed in the gallery after Malith left. The afternoon session was different from the morning. Smaller, more intimate. Just the Queen and a handful of senior advisors discussing something the translator identified as resource allocation for the outer provinces. I watched the dynamics carefully. 2 of the advisors deferred to Seveni in the standard formal way, but 3 others kept glancing at each other before speaking. Tiny coordinated movements that a Veilari would never notice, because their social processing did not flag those signals. But a human, a species that had spent 100,000 years reading each other's micro-expressions around campfires and across negotiating tables, I saw it instantly. Those 3 were performing for someone who was not in the room. They were synchronized, managed, reporting to a handler. I filed that observation away and kept watching. The Queen's voice during the advisory session was flat and mechanical, compared to the way she had spoken to me the night before. She delivered rulings and approvals in the same ceremonial cadence, and I could see the distance between the woman I had met and the sovereign performing her function. It was like watching someone wear a mask so long they had forgotten how their real face moved. When the session ended, Seveni stood and walked toward the exit without looking at anyone, but just before she reached the archway, she paused. Her head turned, fractionally, toward the gallery where I was sitting. She could not have seen me through the ornamental screens, but she knew I was there. She stood still for 2 heartbeats, then continued walking, and I was left with the strange conviction that my presence had been the only unscripted thing in her entire day. That afternoon, the Queen summoned me, not through the ambassador, not through protocol channels. A guard simply appeared at my door and told me to follow, and I was led to a private chamber I had not known existed. A small room with a single window and 2 chairs, one scaled for Veilari proportions, and one, absurdly, sized for a human. She had it brought for me. The Queen of 43 star systems had arranged for a chair that fit my body. Seveni was seated when I entered. Without the ceremonial robes and the towering headdress, she looked different. Not smaller, because nothing about this woman could ever appear small, but more real. She wore simple dark blue, and her silver-white hair fell loose past her shoulders, and her eyes tracked me across the room with an intensity that made the air feel thick. "Sit," she said. I sat. "On your world," she began, and then stopped. She was quiet for a moment, and I realized with a start that she was nervous. The Queen of the Veilari Queendom was nervous talking to me. "On your world, do males speak this way to females who hold authority?" "What way?" "Directly, without filter, without consulting someone above them for permission." "Yes, all the time." "And this is not considered a violation?" "It is considered normal, healthy even. Where I come from, we think something is wrong if you cannot speak honestly to the people around you, especially the people in charge." She leaned forward slightly. "You speak honestly to your leaders?" "We argue with them, question them, disagree with them, sometimes loudly, sometimes in public. We elect them specifically so we can hold them accountable, and accountability requires honesty." Her eyes widened. It was subtle, but I was learning to read her expressions. The Veilari face was more controlled than a human one, but the eyes gave everything away if you paid attention. "Your males argue with your females in power?" "Our everyone argues with our everyone. It is not a male or female issue. It is a human issue. We believe that the right to speak the truth does not depend on your rank, your gender, or your species. It depends on your courage." She sat back. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, and I could see something working behind those violet eyes, something old and heavy shifting position. "Counselor Malith tells me you are observant," she said. "That you watched my court this morning, and understood what you were seeing. Tell me what you saw." I saw a room full of people performing for an audience of one, and the audience was not allowed to tell them the performance was empty. She flinched. It was tiny, a micro-movement in the muscles around her eyes, but it was real, and it told me I had hit something that mattered. "You are very direct," she said quietly. "That is the nicest thing anyone has called me since I arrived." Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, a tremor. A memory of what smiling felt like, maybe, from a woman who had not been given a reason to practice in a long time. She asked me more questions. About Earth, about our history with leaders, about how human relationships worked between people of different status, different power. She was fascinated and disturbed in equal measure by the idea that a human leader's spouse might publicly disagree with them, that a junior officer might challenge a general's strategy, that a citizen might stand on a street corner and shout criticism of the most powerful person in the nation. I answered everything honestly. It was the only thing I knew how to do, and it was apparently the one thing this civilization had never offered her. The conversation lasted 2 hours. When it ended, she stood and looked down at me from her full height, and her expression was unreadable again, but different from before. The mask was back, but there were cracks in it now, and light was coming through. "You will continue in your role as cultural observer," she said. "You will attend all court sessions. You will be given access to the diplomatic archives. And you will report to me directly. Your Majesty, I am not sure the ambassador will approve of that arrangement. The ambassador's approval is not required. Mine is, and I have given it." She turned to leave, and I should have let her go. I should have bowed and stayed quiet, and played the role I had been assigned. But I had already destroyed every protocol this civilization held sacred, so I figured one more could not make things much worse. "Your Majesty?" She paused. "You asked me earlier if I meant what I said last night. I did. But I want to add something." She turned her head, just enough to see me from the corner of her eye. "You are not just beautiful," I said. "You are also deeply, visibly, unmistakably lonely. And I think everyone in your court knows it, and nobody has the courage to say it, and that is a failure that belongs to them, not to you." She stood completely still. I could see her shoulders tighten, and her fingers pressed against her thigh, and for a terrible moment, I thought I had gone too far. Then she walked out without a word, and the door sealed behind her, and I was alone in a room designed for a queen's private conversations, with a chair that had been built for me. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the most powerful woman in 43 star systems, and the way her hand had trembled when I told her she was lonely. That evening, Drelith found me. I was walking through one of the lower galleries, trying to find my way back to the royal wing, when she stepped out of an alcove as if she had been waiting. Up close, she was imposing in a way that felt mechanical, engineered, like every angle of her body had been calculated for maximum intimidation. Her amber eyes locked onto me with the flat precision of a weapon system acquiring a target. "Human," she said. "We need to speak." "High Commandant, I was just heading back to my quarters." "You were just heading wherever I tell you to head." She stepped closer. "I understand you have made quite an impression on our queen. A cultural observer, assigned to the royal wing, granted private audiences. Very impressive for a male of a species we have not even formally classified. I am as surprised as anyone." "I doubt that very much." Her voice dropped. "Let me be clear with you, because I understand your species values clarity. There is a vote coming, a classification vote, that will determine how the queendom interacts with your people for the next 1,000 years. Your species can be designated as a sovereign partner, which gives you standing and protections, or as a client race, which places you under the administrative oversight of the Defense Tribunal. Under your oversight? Under appropriate oversight? Your species is new. You are fragile. You need guidance. And you are volunteering to guide us." She smiled, and it was nothing like the Queen's smile. It was a mechanical thing, a tool deployed for effect, and it had all the warmth of a blade. "Humanity is a species that has been traveling between stars for less than 1 generation. You have no interstellar allies, no defensive treaties, no experience with galactic governance. Your worlds are unshielded. Your population is concentrated on a single planet. You are, by every measurable standard, the most vulnerable species in this region of space. Client race status is not a punishment, it is survival. Without it, you are a single asteroid strike away from extinction, and there is no one obligated to prevent it. She let that sink in. It was effective. The vulnerability of Earth was not something I could argue with, and she knew it. I am telling you that the classification vote will go the way it is going to go, and your job is to make that process smooth. You have the Queen's ear. Use it to help her see the wisdom of client race status for humanity. Assure her that your people will accept it gracefully. Do this, and your delegation goes home safely with a trade agreement and a future. And if I don't? She leaned in close enough that I could see the fine scales along her jawline, each one a perfect, cold tile. Then your role as cultural observer will end. Abruptly, and the classification vote will proceed without any human input at all, which I assure you, will not produce an outcome your species enjoys. She straightened up, adjusted the collar of her military dress, and walked away without waiting for a response. Her boots echoed on the gallery floor like a countdown. I stood there in the pale bioluminescent light and felt the shape of something I had not expected. This was not diplomacy. This was not cultural exchange. Something was moving inside this court, something with teeth, and I had just been told to either serve it or be consumed by it. I thought about Malith's warning. I thought about the Queen, sitting in her private chamber with a chair she had built for a human she barely knew. I thought about the way Dralith had looked at the empty throne that afternoon, measuring it, calculating. I was a junior cultural attaché. I took notes for a living. I was the least important person on this planet by every metric that existed. But I was also the only person in 41 years who had told the Queen the truth, and apparently, that made me the most dangerous man in the Queendom. I started walking back to my quarters, and for the first time since I had arrived on this world, I was not thinking about survival. I was thinking about a woman behind a mask, and the people who had put it there, and what it might cost to help her take it off. 3 days passed, and I learned more about the Velari court in those 3 days than the entire human diplomatic corps had learned in 6 months. The trick was simple. Nobody watched me. In a civilization where males were politically invisible, I could stand in a room full of power brokers and conspirators and gather information the way a microphone gathers sound, passively, constantly, without anyone thinking to turn me off. Counselor Malith had given me access to the diplomatic archives, and I spent my mornings there, reading through centuries of Velari political history. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. The Queendom operated on a balance of power between the throne and the military command, with the clergy and the noble houses acting as counterweights. For most of its history, that balance had held. Queens ruled, commandants defended, and the system functioned because both sides understood their boundaries. But something had shifted in the last decade. Slowly, quietly, like water seeping through cracks in a foundation. I pulled records of court appointments and cross-referenced them with military promotions. I tracked the rotation of provincial governors and compared their backgrounds. I mapped the membership of the Crown Advisory Council across the past 15 years. The picture that emerged was surgical. Over the past 10 years, every independent voice in the Queen's inner circle had been replaced. Advisors who questioned military spending had been reassigned to remote provinces. Governors who maintained direct communication with the throne had been rotated out in favor of candidates from military families. 3 members of the Crown Advisory Council had retired, under circumstances that the records described as voluntary, but that followed a pattern so precise it could not be coincidental. Dralith had been pruning the Queen's support structure like a gardener shaping a tree, cutting away every branch that might offer shade, leaving 70 exposed and alone at the top of a system that answered increasingly to someone other than its queen. I documented everything: dates, names, the sequence of changes, the connections between seemingly unrelated appointments. I used a method I had learned in diplomatic training, a human analytical framework designed for detecting covert influence operations in foreign governments. It was basic intelligence work, the kind of thing any decent analyst could do with enough data. The difference was that no Velari had ever thought to do it. Their communication style was formal and hierarchical, built on direct statements and explicit authority. Subterfuge operated in the gaps between those structures, in the things that were not said, in the patterns that only appeared when you stepped back and looked at the whole picture at once. Human social intelligence, our evolved ability to detect lies, read subtext, and map hidden relationships, was invisible to them because they did not know it existed. I was a sensor array, operating on a frequency this civilization could not detect. I also spent time with Danny, who had been doing his own quiet research from the delegation's quarters. He had compiled a list of every species the Queendom had classified in the last 2 centuries, and the outcomes for those classified as client races. The results were not reassuring. Client races lost autonomous governance within a decade. Their economies were restructured to serve Queendom supply chains. Their military capabilities were dismantled and replaced with Velari defense garrisons that answered to the defense tribunal, not to the species being defended. In every case, client race status was permanent. No species had ever been reclassified upward. If Draelith gets her vote, Danny said, his face pale in the light of his data screen, Earth becomes a resource colony with better marketing. We keep our flag and our anthem, and we lose everything else. That was the stakes, not just my career, not just the delegation's mission. The freedom of the entire human race, decided in a committee room on an alien world, by people who considered us barely worth noticing. On the 3rd evening, I requested a private audience with the Queen. The guard who received my request looked at me as though I had asked to borrow the sun, but 20 minutes later, I was escorted to the same private chamber, and Seveni was waiting. She looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes that had not been there 3 days ago, and her posture, usually as rigid as architecture, had softened just enough to suggest the weight she was carrying had increased. "You asked to see me," she said. "That is unusual. I have something to show you, and I do not think it can wait." I laid it out for her, all of it. The systematic replacement of her allies, the coordinated reassignment of independent governors, the pattern of retirements and promotions that traced back to a single point of origin. I showed her how Draelith had built a network inside her own government, patient and methodical, positioning loyal officers at every critical node until the Queen's authority ran through channels that Draelith controlled. "You are being isolated," I said. "It has been happening for years, and it has been done so carefully that each individual change looks routine, but the pattern is unmistakable. Someone is preparing to take control, and they have been building toward it for at least a decade." Seveni listened without interrupting. Her face was still, but her eyes moved across the data I had compiled with a speed and precision that reminded me she had been governing an interstellar empire since before I was born. She was not processing this as a surprise. She was processing it as confirmation. "You knew," I said. "I suspected. Suspicion without evidence is paranoia, and paranoia in a queen is a weapon her enemies can use against her. I needed proof, and I could not seek it because everyone I might have asked is part of the structure you have just described. There is more." I hesitated, because the next part was the part that frightened me. "There is an ancient law in your legal code, the Military Protection Mandate. It allows the Defense Tribunal to assume emergency regency over the throne if the sovereign is deemed to be compromised by external influence." Her eyes sharpened. "I am aware of the law. Your Majesty, I believe I am the external influence. I believe Draelith maneuvered to keep the human delegation here, specifically so she could use my presence, my proximity to you, as evidence of sovereign compromise. The classification vote is not about humanity. It is about you. If she can demonstrate that an alien male has altered your judgment, she invokes the mandate, and the military takes operational control of the government." The silence that followed was the heaviest I had ever experienced. It pressed against me like a physical force, and I could feel the Queen processing the implications at a speed that made my analysis look like a rough draft. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that the conspiracy against my throne is using you as a weapon." "Yes. And you are bringing this to me directly, despite knowing that doing so proves Draelith's accusation. The alien has influenced the Queen. The Queen is listening to the alien. The sovereign is compromised. I know how it looks." It looks exactly the way she designed it to look. Sevani stood and walked to the window. The 3 moons were high, casting overlapping shadows across the city below. If I act on your information, I confirm her narrative. If I do not act, she completes her preparations and invokes the mandate on her own timeline. You have identified the trap, Ethan Cole. But identifying a trap does not disarm it. It does if you know where the trigger is. She turned back to me. What are you proposing? I am proposing something no alien species has ever offered you. Human help. Not a fleet, not a political alliance, not leverage. Just me, standing where I am, telling you the truth, and helping you find a way through this. Why? The question was quiet, and it was not political. She was not asking why strategically or diplomatically. She was asking why personally. Why would a human male from a species that barely qualified as spacefaring risk his life for a queen who was not even his own kind? I could have given her a diplomatic answer. I could have talked about interspecies cooperation, mutual benefit, the strategic importance of Velari partnership to humanity's future. All of those things were true, and none of them were the reason. Because you deserve to have someone on your side who is not on your payroll, I said. Because where I come from, when someone tries to cut you off from everyone who would tell you the truth, the answer is to find one person who will, and hold on to them. I am that person. Not because I am qualified, or powerful, or important. I am that person because I am here, and because I am not going to pretend I do not see what is happening to you. She stared at me, and something behind her eyes shifted. Not a crack this time. A door. Something opening that had been locked for a very long time, and I could see the effort it took, the years of careful isolation she had to push through just to let one honest exchange reach her. You barely know me, she said. I know you have been sitting on that throne for 41 years, and no one has told you the truth in any of them. That is enough. She walked back to her chair and sat down, and for a moment, she was not a queen. She was a woman who was very tired and very alone, and who had just been handed something she had stopped believing existed. She looked at me from across the room, and her expression was raw in a way that made me look away, because some moments belong to the person having them, and watching feels like trespass. I am not powerless, she said finally. Draylith believes I am. She has spent 10 years ensuring it, but she made a mistake. She assumed that because she controlled my circle, she controlled my intelligence. She did not. I have operatives she does not know about, placed in positions she does not watch. I have been gathering my own information, slowly, carefully, waiting for a catalyst. What kind of catalyst? The kind that forces her to move before she is ready. The kind that makes her show her hand publicly, where my loyal operatives can document it, and my remaining allies can act on it. She looked at me, and I understood. You need her to overreact, I said. You need her to invoke the mandate prematurely, before her network is fully in place, so the attempt fails and exposes the conspiracy. I need a provocation she cannot ignore, something that appears to confirm her narrative so completely that she abandons her timeline and acts on impulse rather than strategy. The realization hit me like cold water. You need me to keep doing exactly what I have been doing. I need you to be yourself, Ethan Cole. I need you to be direct and honest and visible. I need you to stand in the center of my court and be everything this civilization says a male should not be, because every moment you do that is a moment Draylith's anger overrides her planning. You are asking me to be bait. I am asking you to be brave. Those are not the same thing, but I understand if they feel similar. I sat in my human-sized chair and looked at the Queen of 43 star systems, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. She had not kept me around because I confused her. She had not given me quarters in the royal wing because she was curious. She had recognized something in my honesty that she could use, not as a weapon against me, but as a weapon against the people who had been trying to cage her for a decade. I was not a pawn, I was a key, and she had been waiting for someone to turn the lock. I will do it, I said, but I have one condition. Her eyebrows rose slightly. You are setting conditions with a queen. I am setting conditions with a person. After this is over, However it ends, you do not go back behind that mask. You find a way to let people talk to you like a human being, like a person. Because the isolation nearly killed your reign, and you deserve better than a throne that keeps you silent. She was quiet for a very long time. The moons shifted outside the window, and the shadows in the room rearranged themselves around us. You are a very strange creature, Ethan Cole. I have been told. If we survive what is coming, I will consider your condition. That is the best I can offer. I will take it. She nodded once, and I saw the Queen reassemble herself in real time, the mask sliding back into place, the posture straightening, the vulnerability sealing shut behind eyes that had shown me more than they had shown anyone in decades. I stood to leave, and she spoke once more. Ethan. Yes? For what it is worth, no one has ever spoken to me the way you do. I do not know if it is a human trait or a personal one, but it is the most unsettling and the most valuable thing I have experienced in 41 years on this throne. I walked back to my quarters through the silent corridors of the royal wing, and I thought about what was coming. Draelith had the military, she had the network, she had 10 years of preparation. I had honesty, stubbornness, and a queen who was done being caged. It would have to be enough. The next morning, Draelith struck. She did not wait for the scheduled classification vote. She did not follow her own careful timeline. She moved fast, and she moved hard, and the speed of it told me that our calculation had been right. She was angry. She was reacting. And angry people make mistakes. The court was assembled for what had been announced as a routine administrative session. I was in my usual position in the observer's gallery, watching from above, when Draelith walked to the center of the courtroom floor and did something no one expected. She activated the Grand Address Protocol, a procedure that locked the chamber, prevented anyone from leaving, and compelled every member of the court to hear her statement as a matter of formal record. The Queen was on her throne. She showed no reaction, but I saw her fingers tighten on the armrest. Draelith's voice filled the chamber like a blade being drawn. I invoke the right of military petition before the Crown Tribunal. I bring charges of sovereign contamination against the human male designated Ethan Cole, cultural observer to this court. I further bring a petition for emergency evaluation of the sovereign's judgment under the military protection mandate, on the grounds that the Queen's decision-making has been compromised by unsanctioned alien influence. The court erupted. Not in the controlled, formal way I had seen before. This was genuine chaos, voices overlapping, officials rising from their seats, guards shifting position along the walls. The protocol minister was shouting something about proper channels. 3 members of the advisory council were trying to leave and finding the doors sealed. Draelith stood in the center of it all, untouched, immovable, letting the chaos prove her point. See how fragile this court is. See how easily it breaks. The Queen cannot maintain order. The system needs stronger hands. Sevani raised her hand, and the room went quiet. It took longer than usual. That was deliberate on Draelith's part, I was certain. Every second of delay was evidence. The petition is heard, the Queen said, and her voice was level and cold and absolutely controlled. The Crown Tribunal will convene. 2 hours later, I was standing in a circle of light on the floor of the largest chamber I had ever seen. The Crown Tribunal amphitheater was carved from a single piece of dark stone, rising in concentric tiers that held the assembled nobility, military command, clergy, and civilian officials of the Velari Queendom. Every seat was filled. Thousands of alien faces looked down at me, and the weight of their attention was a physical thing, pressing against my chest. The Queen sat at the apex, on a throne of black crystal that caught the light and threw it back in fragments. Her expression was carved from marble. She did not look at me. She could not afford to. I stood alone. The tribunal circle was designed for the accused, and I was the first male in Velari history to stand in it. There was no defense attorney, no advocate, no legal representative. The rules were ancient and absolute. You spoke for yourself, or you were judged in silence. Draelith descended the steps to the prosecution platform, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment. She was in full military dress, every medal and insignia arranged for maximum authority, and she addressed the tribunal with a voice that carried to every corner of the amphitheater. 3 standard days ago, a male of the human species committed the most fundamental violation of Valari sovereign protocol by addressing the Queen's physical appearance directly and without sanction. Rather than being reprimanded and removed, this male was rewarded. He was assigned quarters in the royal wing. He was granted private audiences with the sovereign. He was given access to sensitive diplomatic archives. And in the days since, the Queen's behavior has deviated from established patterns in ways that are documented and measurable. She presented evidence, records of my movements through the palace, logs of my archive access, timestamps of my private meetings with Seveni. She presented testimony from court officials who had observed changes in the Queen's demeanor, her responses, her decision-making. She framed every data point as proof of corruption, as evidence that an alien male had infiltrated the sovereign's judgment and bent it to serve his species' interests. It was precise, it was thorough, and it was built on a foundation of truth, which made it devastating. When she finished, the tribunal moderator, a severe elderly female with white-streaked silver skin, turned to me. "The accused may speak." I looked up at the thousands of faces looking down at me, and I felt the fear I had been expecting since the moment I opened my mouth in the reception hall. It was huge and cold, and it sat in my stomach like a stone, and I let it be there. I did not try to push it away. Fear is not the enemy. Silence is. "My name is Ethan Cole," I said, and my voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to in that vast space. I cleared my throat and started again, louder. "My name is Ethan Cole. I am a cultural attaché of the Human Diplomatic Delegation, and I am accused of contaminating your queen with my influence. I want to address that charge directly." I turned to face Drelith. She met my eyes without flinching. "3 days ago, I told your queen she was beautiful. That is the seed of everything you have heard today. One honest sentence from a human who did not know he was supposed to be silent. The High Commandant has built her entire case on the premise that this sentence, and the conversations that followed it, constitute a corruption of sovereign judgment. She has presented evidence. She has presented testimony. She has presented a narrative in which a single alien male somehow managed to undermine 41 years of royal authority in 3 days." I paused and let that sit. I want you to think about that. I want you to consider what it says about this court, and about this system, that one honest sentence could be perceived as a threat to the entire structure of your government. I am not a general. I am not a spy. I have no fleet, no weapons, no political power of any kind. I am the lowest-ranking member of a delegation from a species you had not even classified yet. And the High Commandant is standing before you, arguing that I, alone, with nothing but words, have somehow compromised the most powerful sovereign in 43 star systems. I let my gaze move across the tiers. Some faces were hostile. Some were uncertain. Some were listening. Either your queen is so weak that a single conversation can topple her judgment, in which case the queendom has much larger problems than one human male. Or something else is happening, something that has nothing to do with me. I turned back to the full tribunal. My hands were steady, my voice was steady. Inside, my heart was hammering so hard I was surprised the microphones did not pick it up. "The High Commandant has presented evidence of my movements, my access, my meetings with the Queen. Let me present evidence of hers." That got a reaction. A ripple of surprise moved through the tiers. Drelith's expression did not change, but her posture shifted, and I saw her hands tighten behind her back. "Over the past 10 years, I said, the Queen's Advisory Council has been restructured 14 times. In every restructuring, members with independent political bases were replaced by individuals with direct ties to the military command, specifically to the High Commandant's office. I listed names. I listed dates. I recited them from memory because I had spent 3 days memorizing every detail, knowing this moment would come. Over the same period, 7 provincial governors who maintained direct communication with the throne were rotated to remote postings and replaced by candidates from military families. The Queen's personal intelligence briefings were rerouted through the Defense Tribunal's Analysis Division, which is staffed entirely by officers who report to the High Commandant. and 3 members of the Crown Advisory Council retired voluntarily, in each case within 60 days of receiving private visits from senior military officials. I turned slowly, addressing every section of the amphitheater, making sure my words reached the clergy, as well as the nobles, the civilian administrators, as well as the military officers. These are not coincidences. This is a campaign, and it was designed to do one thing, to ensure that when the moment came to challenge the Queen's authority, there would be no one left in this court, willing or able to defend her. The amphitheater was absolutely silent. I could hear the hum of the lighting systems above. The High Commandant has not brought these charges because a human told the Queen she was beautiful. She has brought these charges because a human told the Queen the truth, and the truth threatened a plan that has been 10 years in the making. I am not the threat to this court. The threat is standing on the prosecution platform, wearing medals she intends to trade for a crown. Drelith moved. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. This is deflection. This is manipulation. This is precisely the kind of alien corruption I warned the tribunal about. The human has learned our political structure and is using it to confuse and divide. I am using it to tell the truth, I said. And the fact that the truth sounds like an attack tells you everything you need to know about what has been happening in this court. I turned to the tribunal moderator. I have one more thing to say, and then I will yield the floor. She nodded. I looked up at the tiers, and I spoke to all of them. I come from a civilization where speaking truth to power is not a crime, it is a duty. Where I come from, the measure of a leader is not how well she is shielded from honesty, but how well she handles it when it arrives. I told your Queen she was beautiful, because I saw it, and I felt it, and I said it. That is what humans do. We notice things, and we say them out loud, even when it is terrifying, even when it costs us, even when every rational calculation says to stay quiet. My voice was firm now. The fear was still there, but it was fuel, not an anchor. You want to know why the Queen listened to me? It was not because I am clever. It was not because I have some alien power of persuasion. It was because I was the first person in 41 years to speak to her like she was a person, instead of a title. Think about that. 41 years. Your Queen, your sovereign, the woman who has held your civilization together for longer than most of you have been alive, has not had a single genuine conversation in 4 decades. Not because she did not want one, because your system made it impossible. Because your protocols and your hierarchies and your rules built a wall around her and called it respect. And behind that wall, she has been alone. I let the silence hold. That is not my crime. That is yours. I turned to face the throne where Seven Eye sat, and I spoke directly to her, breaking the tribunal's protocol one more time, because at this point, another broken rule was barely a footnote. Your Majesty, I am not a diplomat. I am not a politician. I am a man who walked into a hall and said 5 words he meant. Everything that followed, every conversation, every truth, every moment of connection, happened because I treated you like a person. If that is contamination, then your civilization has a very different definition of the word than mine. Where I come from, we call it respect. The eruption that followed was the loudest sound I had heard since arriving on this world. Half the tribunal was on its feet. Drelith was shouting for order, demanding that I be restrained, calling for an immediate vote. The moderator was striking the ceremonial chime again and again, trying to restore control. And then the Queen stood. It happened without drama, without ceremony. One moment she was seated, the next she was on her feet, and the effect was instantaneous. Every voice stopped, every body stilled. The Queen standing during a tribunal was not in the protocol. It had not happened in recorded history. The rules did not account for it, and in the absence of rules, there was only the raw, undeniable authority of the woman who wore the crown. I invoke the sovereign word, she said. The moderator went pale. 3 members of the clergy rose to their feet and then sank back into their seats, uncertain. The sovereign word was older than the tribunal itself, a power that predated every institution in the queendom, and it had not been spoken in 700 years. This tribunal is mine, Savani said. The judgment is mine, the law is mine, and I will render both. She looked down at me from the apex of the amphitheater, and her eyes were the color of deep space, and her face was the face of a woman who had waited 41 years for this moment and was not going to let it pass. The court will reconvene at the sovereign's discretion, the moderator said, her voice shaking. All parties will remain until the Queen's judgment is delivered. I stood in my circle of light and waited, and I had no idea if I had just won or just handed the Queen a weapon she would use to cut me down. The fear was enormous, the silence was total. And somewhere far above me, on a throne of black crystal, the most powerful woman in 43 star systems was looking at me with an expression that might have been gratitude, or might have been something else entirely. Nobody moved. The amphitheater held 3,000 Velari officials, military commanders, clergy members, and noble representatives, and not one of them breathed loud enough to hear. The Queen stood at the apex, silhouetted against the fractured light of the black crystal throne, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something that had been building for 4 decades. I have been your queen for 41 years, she said. In that time, I have received the loyalty of this court, the devotion of this clergy, and the obedience of this military. I have been called radiant, transcendent, and magnificent. I have been protected by protocols designed to shield me from anything unfiltered, anything raw, anything true. And I want this tribunal to understand something clearly before I deliver judgment. She descended the first 3 steps from the throne platform. I had never seen her leave the throne during a formal proceeding. From the reaction of the court, neither had anyone else. The protection you built around me was not protection. It was a cage, and the woman who designed the cage is standing on the prosecution platform. Odralith did not move. Her face was controlled, set in hard lines, but I saw the muscles in her neck tighten. She had planned for many outcomes. She had not planned for this. Sevani continued walking down the steps, slow and deliberate, each footfall echoing through the silent amphitheater. High Commandant Dralith Valasevra, 14 restructurings of my advisory council in 10 years. 7 governors rotated from posts where they served me well to posts where they could serve no one. Intelligence briefings rerouted through your analysis division, filtered, shaped, reduced to what you wanted me to know. 3 council members pressured into retirement by officers under your direct command. She listed the evidence I had presented, but she added to it. She added details I did not have, names I had not found, operations I had not uncovered. She had her own intelligence. She had been watching Dralith for years, patient and quiet, and seemingly powerless. And the patience had not been weakness. It had been strategy. You believed you controlled my eyes and ears, the Queen said. You believed that because you controlled the flow of information, you controlled the truth. But you made an error. You assumed I had no sources you did not know about. I do. They have been in place for 6 years, watching you, documenting your movements, recording your communications. I did not act because I lacked evidence. I acted because I lacked a catalyst. She stopped on the main floor of the amphitheater, 20 feet from Dralith, and the space between them crackled with something that was not electricity but felt like it. You gave me that catalyst. You moved before your network was fully ready. You accelerated your timeline because a human male made you angry, and anger made you sloppy. You invoked the military protection mandate 3 weeks ahead of your own schedule, before your secondary loyalists in the provincial commands were in position, before your financial channels were fully secured, before the 3 warship commanders you needed to guarantee military compliance had confirmed their commitments. Dralith's composure broke. It was small, a widening of the eyes, a single step backward, but in a civilization where control was everything, it was the equivalent of a scream. I know the names of your conspirators, Sevani said. I know their ranks, their positions, their communications, and their financial arrangements. I have known for 2 years. I have been waiting for you to give me a reason to act publicly, because a queen who moves against her own military commander without visible provocation is a tyrant, and I will not be a tyrant, even to save my own throne. She turned to face the tribunal. The human spoke the truth. Every word of it. The threat to this court is not an alien cultural observer who told me I was beautiful. The threat is a military commander who spent 10 years building a shadow government inside my own walls and who attempted to use one honest man as the excuse to complete her takeover. She did not shout. She did not need to. Every word landed with the precision of someone who had been composing this speech in her mind for years, waiting for the moment when the door opened wide enough to drive it through. Commander Drelith Val Osevra, you are stripped of rank, title, and command authority. Officers Savith Val Druin, Korith Val Mael, and Prelate Dis Val Orin, your conspirators whose names and evidence are filed with the sovereign record, you are likewise stripped and placed under sovereign arrest. Guards. The royal guards moved, not the ones stationed at the amphitheater doors. Those belonged to the General Security Force, and Drelith's loyalists had infiltrated their ranks months ago. These guards emerged from positions hidden behind the tribunal seating, from maintenance corridors and secondary entries that no one had been watching. They wore the deep black of the Queen's Own, a unit so old and so quiet that most of the court had forgotten it existed. Drelith's guards reached for their weapons. The Queen's Own were faster. Not by much, but enough. Within 30 seconds, Drelith and her co-conspirators were surrounded, disarmed, and held in place by soldiers who answered to no one but the woman on the throne. Drelith looked at the Queen, and her amber eyes burned with something that was beyond anger, something that had been denied and now could not be contained. You used the human, she said. You let him walk through your court, let him speak to you, let him break every rule, because you knew I would react. You used him the same way I tried to use him. Sevani looked at her for a long moment. No, she said, I did not use him. He chose to stand where he stood. He chose to speak the truth when silence was safer. He chose to help me, not because I asked him to, but because he believed it was right. That is the difference between you and him, Drelith. You moved people like pieces on a board. He moved because his conscience told him to. Drelith was escorted from the amphitheater. She did not struggle. She walked with her spine straight and her eyes forward, and the last thing she did before the doors closed behind her was look at me. The expression on her face was not hatred. It was something worse. It was the look of someone realizing they had lost to something they could not understand and could never have predicted. The tribunal moderator stood, visibly shaken, and asked the Queen if there were additional judgments to be rendered. One, Sevani said. She turned to face the assembled court, and she activated the diplomatic broadcast channel. Her image and voice would now be transmitted to every embassy, every allied government, every diplomatic station in the Queendom's 43 star systems. The classification vote regarding the human species is cancelled, she announced. Humanity will not be designated as a client race. Humanity will not be placed under the oversight of any military or administrative body. Instead, I am invoking sovereign prerogative to establish a full bilateral alliance between the Velari Queendom and the human race, a partnership of equals, with mutual rights, mutual obligations, and mutual respect. The reaction in the amphitheater was a living thing, a wave of sound that rolled through the tiers and broke against the walls. Some of it was approval, some of it was shock, most of it was the sound of a civilization realizing that something fundamental had changed, and there was no going back. The human species, the Queen said, and her voice carried above the noise with an authority that silenced it, has demonstrated something that no other species in the history of the Queendom has ever offered. Not military strength, not technological advantage, not political leverage. Humans have demonstrated the willingness to speak truth to power, regardless of the cost to themselves. One human, unarmed, unranked, and entirely alone, stood in the center of this tribunal and told this court what it needed to hear when every incentive said he should stay silent. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but it reached every corner of the amphitheater. A civilization that punishes honesty is a civilization that has already begun to die. Today, we stop dying. Today, we begin to listen. I stood in my circle of light and felt something I had not expected. Not pride, not relief. Something simpler and more overwhelming. The feeling of being seen, of having done something true and having it matter. The formal session lasted another hour. Administrative details, the restructuring of the advisory council, security arrangements for the transition, I stayed in the tribunal circle for all of it, because no one told me I could leave, and because leaving felt like it would break something that was still forming. When it was finally over, when the tiers had emptied and the amphitheater was echoing with the footsteps of departing officials, Ambassador Wells found me. He looked different. The diplomatic polish was back, but underneath it was something I had not seen before: respect. "You know you nearly gave me a heart attack," he said. "I nearly gave myself one. The alliance treaty will take months to negotiate. There are details, frameworks, legal structures. It will be the most complex piece of interstellar diplomacy in human history." "Yes, sir." He put his hand on my shoulder. "You will not be returning to your previous posting, Ethan. I am recommending you for a permanent diplomatic assignment here. Senior Cultural Liaison. It is the kind of promotion that usually takes 15 years to earn. You did it in 4 days." He walked away, and I stood alone in the amphitheater, looking up at the empty throne, and I thought about how strange it was that the most important thing I had ever done started with 5 whispered words and the inability to keep my mouth shut. I found Counselor Malith waiting in the corridor outside. She was standing against the wall with her arms folded and an expression that was closer to a smile than anything I had seen from her. "Well," she said. "Well. You know, when I first brought you to observe the court, I believed you might be useful as an irritant. A small disruption that could be managed and directed. I did not anticipate that you would stand in the tribunal circle and dismantle a decade-long conspiracy with nothing but your voice and your stubbornness." Is that a compliment? It is an observation. Humans are deeply inconvenient creatures, Ethan Cole. I suspect the galaxy is about to discover this in a very large way. She straightened up and walked away, her blue robes whispering against the stone floor, and I was alone again. The palace was quiet that evening. The aftermath of the tribunal had sent waves through every level of the government, and people were retreating to their offices and residences to process what had happened. I walked back to my quarters in the royal wing, through corridors that no longer felt hostile. The guards I passed did not stare with suspicion. Some of them nodded. One of them, a young female with pale silver skin, stopped me and said 3 words in Velari that the translator rendered as, "Thank you, honest one." I did not know what to do with that, so I nodded and kept walking. The 3 moons were rising when I reached the balcony outside my quarters. The city below was vast and luminous, a web of light stretching to every horizon under a sky that held more stars than I could count. I leaned against the railing and breathed, and for the first time since I had arrived on this world, the air did not feel heavy with expectation. It felt clean, open. I heard footsteps behind me, light and steady and unmistakable. "You should sleep," Queen Savani said. "You have had a very long day." "So have you." She came to stand beside me at the railing. Without the ceremonial trappings, without the crown and the formal robes, and the weight of 10,000 eyes, she was still the tallest person I had ever stood next to, and still the most striking. The moonlight caught her silver-white hair and made it glow, and her violet eyes reflected the lights of the city below like 2 fragments of a different sky. "I owe you a debt," she said. "The queendom owes you a debt. I am not certain how to repay it. You do not owe me anything. I owe you honesty, at the very least, and honest gratitude. Then I will accept that." We stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the city, and the silence was not heavy. It was the comfortable kind, the kind that exists between people who have been through something together and do not need words to acknowledge it. "Your condition," she said. "My condition?" "You said that after this was over, I should not go back behind the mask, that I should find a way to let people speak to me honestly." "I remember. I have been thinking about it. It is a harder thing than you might imagine. 41 years of protocol do not simply dissolve because one human told me they should. But I am willing to try. I am restructuring the advisory council with members selected for competence and candor rather than political alignment. I am abolishing the communication protocols that prevented direct address to the throne, and I am creating a new position in my court, one that has never existed before." "What position?" "An official whose sole function is to tell me the truth, especially when it is uncomfortable." A voice that cannot be silenced by protocol, cannot be overridden by hierarchy, and cannot be punished for saying what needs to be said. That sounds like a terrible job. It is. That is why I am offering it to you. You are the only person I have met who seems to enjoy being terrible in exactly this way. I laughed. It came out before I could stop it, a real laugh, the kind that shakes your shoulders and makes your eyes water, and it echoed off the balcony railing and floated out over the alien city under 3 rising moons. The Queen watched me laugh, with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was warm. It was open. It was the face of someone remembering what it felt like to be near joy. I accept, I said, when I could breathe again. On one condition. Another condition. I get to keep the chair. That tremor at the corner of her mouth again, almost a smile, closer this time. You may keep the chair. We stood there together as the moons climbed higher and the city glowed, and the future stretched out ahead of us in a shape that no one could have predicted. A queen and a nobody from Earth, standing on a balcony, having the kind of conversation that her civilization had spent 40,000 years preventing, and that mine had spent its entire history insisting on. Ethan, she said. Yes? Do you still think I am gorgeous? I looked up at her. 7 feet of silver blue skin, violet eyes, cheekbones that could end wars. A woman who had just dismantled a conspiracy, reformed a government, and changed the course of her civilization's history in a single afternoon. Honestly, you are terrifying, brilliant, stubborn, and the most impressive person I have ever met. And yes, still gorgeous. She looked at me for a long moment, and then, she did something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She smiled. A real smile. Full and warm and unguarded. And it transformed her face in a way that the holographic portraits could never capture. Because the portraits showed the queen, and this was the woman, and the woman was luminous. In Vaylari tradition, she said, and her voice was soft in a way I had never heard it, when a queen takes a personal consort, the tradition requires that he must first say something honest enough to make the entire court uncomfortable. I stared at her. You have already done that, she said. Several times, in fact, in front of 3,000 witnesses and a galactic broadcast. She did not say what happened next. She did not have to. Some things are bigger than words, and some moments are better left to the silence between 2 people who have earned it. The days that followed were a storm of activity. The Alliance Treaty required frameworks, legal structures, and diplomatic architecture that had never existed between a matriarchal empire and a species that considered gender equality a baseline. I sat in meetings that lasted 12 hours and contributed perspectives that no one else in the room could offer, because no one else in the room was human. I explained concepts like free speech, democratic accountability, the right to dissent, and watched ancient Vaylari officials process ideas that their civilization had never encountered. Some of them embraced the new thinking eagerly, others resisted. A few looked at me the way you look at a storm front approaching the horizon, with respect, and with the understanding that things were about to change whether you liked it or not. Danny Price was reassigned as my deputy, which he accepted with the kind of stunned gratitude that comes from realizing your career has been permanently altered by someone else's inability to whisper quietly. He threw himself into the work with the energy of a man who had found his purpose, and within a week, he was trading jokes with the Vaylari Cultural Liaison staff in a mix of English and badly pronounced Vaylari that somehow worked better than any formal protocol. The Queen visited me once more on the balcony, 3 days after the treaty was signed. The 3 moons were full, all of them, an event that happened once every 11 years, and that the Vaylari considered an omen of transformation. She stood beside me in the silver light and told me that she had received the first honest policy critique from a junior advisor that afternoon, a young female who had disagreed with a trade provision and said so directly, without ceremony. She was terrified, Savani said. Her voice shook the entire time, but she said it. How did it feel? Like waking up. I stood on that balcony, looking out at a universe that had gotten much bigger and much stranger and much more wonderful than I ever expected, and I thought about how I got here. I was a nobody, A junior cultural attaché, a man whose entire job was supposed to be sitting in the background and taking notes while important people did important things. I whispered 5 words in a golden hall, and I changed everything. They will tell the story differently, of course. The historians will turn it into strategy. The diplomats will frame it as a masterstroke of interspecies relations. The military analysts will study the tribunal as a case study in political maneuvering. They will give it context and structure and meaning, and they will make it sound like it was planned from the beginning. But I know the truth. It was never about politics. It was never about strategy. It was about one person standing behind me in a glittering hall. A woman who had not heard an honest word in 41 years, and a human who was too honest to keep his mouth shut. That is humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not our ships, not our weapons, not our technology, our honesty, our stubborn, reckless, inconvenient insistence on saying what is true, even when it is dangerous, especially when it is dangerous, most of all when the person who needs to hear it is the most powerful person in the room. They will study us. They will analyze us. They will build theories about why a species so young and so fragile produces individuals who would rather speak the truth and suffer for it than stay silent and survive in comfort. They will never fully understand it, because it is not a strategy. It is not a calculated advantage. It is who we are. It is the thing that makes us human, and it is the thing that terrifies a galaxy full of civilizations who have forgotten what honesty sounds like. The Queen of 43 star systems smiled at me under 3 alien moons, and I smiled back, and somewhere across the vast dark distance between her world and mine, a bridge was forming that would carry both our civilizations into a future neither of us could have reached alone. It started with a whisper, it ended with a smile, and everything in between was just a man being honest and a woman remembering what it felt like to be seen.